we back and we're still doing well. It's no again.
Are you ready at 7 o'clock? Hi, already here. All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Jamie Norpel, and welcome to another Writers Roundtable. This is a group of local historians that research and write about the history that we love right here in York County. So tonight is a part of our quarterly gathering. We are going to have Nicole come up and speak in a second, and then of course the main show, Pete Miele. But afterwards, we'd love if you could hang out, because a part of this goal is to have a workshop where we share what we're working on. We share so we can learn from one another. If there are insights that you have to archival research or different ideas or books, and frankly, just knowing what we're doing so we can network and support one another with more collaboration. So hang out for that, and also think about what you'd want to share and what you're working on. Of course, I'm sure Pete will steal your attention, but we'd love to hear whatever you got in the works. So no further ado, Nicole Smith from the York County History Center.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming this evening. Just a couple of quick announcements before we get started. We're pretty busy here at the History Center right now. Currently happening is our Book Blast fundraiser at the Agricultural and Industrial Museum. This is June 4th through 6th. We have programs coming up. Our second Saturday program on June 13th is When the Declaration of Independence Was News. It's a book by an author named Emily Snepp, who will be speaking. On June 14th, we have our South Central Pennsylvania Genealogy Conference, our society meeting, and that is going to be the annual Henry James Young Awards for Genealogy. And then on July 1st, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, we have the opening of our brand new exhibit, Revolutionary York, right here in the room next door. July 1st is a donor and member reception, and July 3rd is our public opening. The exhibit will be up for a couple of years if you can't make it, but it should be a fun weekend. Just a reminder that please visit yorkhistorycenter.org for more information on all of our programs. And this program tonight is being recorded and will be on our YouTube channel. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jim McClure. I'm head of the Publications Committee here at History Center. And one of the things that we do is we do a Journal of York County History every year. And in fact, this was the thickest and biggest and best one we ever did last year. And it's part of America 250. That was a theme. And next year, we're again doing America 250, the Articles of Confederation. We have the privilege of having two different America 250s. And because the Articles of Confederation were adopted here in New York, not written here in New York, not signed here in New York, but adopted here in New York in 250 years ago on 2027. So we'll be able to celebrate that anniversary. And to that end, we're accepting articles on the Articles of Federation, stories for this year. The deadline's December 1st, so you have a little bit of time. And so we won't be entirely themed that way, but it will be themed. If you have a story that you want to tell, this is a good place to do it. Some people use this to, if they have outtakes in a book that they are writing, then they can put that outtake in here. It goes, and sometimes people have a book in mind, but they want to start small. So they'll then go to, submit an article for here. Then it goes through an editing process, which is a pretty rigorous editing process. So you have the pleasure of being edited, or the displeasure of being edited, whichever way you want to look at it. And so, but you go through that process. So whenever you go and write a book or something, you'll be ready for that. And so we're accepting entries for next year, America 250, up to December 1st. So glad to have you submit something. This has gone on about 15 years or so. And I know I use it myself, but maybe once every 3 weeks. It's online, all 14 issues or 15 issues are online. You can't Google, it's not indexed, unfortunately, or I don't think. But you can go on there. And for example, someone asked me just this week, they said, what's this about Tom Paine, living in the Cook's house? What's the newest thing about that? Because you wrote a newspaper story, you said that a news story, he said that Tom Paine lived there. And so I was able to send him a story that the foremost expert on that, the guy that lives in the house, Michael Helfrich, wrote on in a journal about 15 years ago. So, there's a lot in there. If you go through there, you'll see topics I bet will interest you. You just go to the York County Heritage History Center website and you can find the back publications that are there. This year's will be coming out in I guess in August, but we're working ahead on it. So we're in August. So we're talking about next year at deadline on December on December 1st. So that's the pitch for the journal. So we have here tonight Pete Miele, who is the senior, I guess it's up there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all of them are.
All of them, they're very distinguished. And he ran the Seminary Ridge Museum for about a decade. One of the things that he picked up there, he's probably not going to say he ran it. Anyway, he was a major figure there for.
I'll settle for that.
Yeah, and so one of the things that if you're around that and you're around the people who are there, they are really good at finding moral sensibilities behind stories, and they're trying to find implications of stories, not just dry facts. I think you'll see that reflected in what Pete talks about tonight. He helps us he does in his writing and his speaking, he helps us make sense of York County. He helps us try to make sense of York County. And so I think, again, we'll see that here tonight. He's going to be doing June Lloyd, who we have the two foremost scholars on Jonathan Mifflin in the same room here tonight. And we'll see if they behave themselves. But at any rate, the work on Jonathan Mifflin is evolving, and June's done a lot, and now then we have Pete picking up the baton, and I think we're going to hear some really interesting things tonight. Jonathan Mifflin, the Mifflin family who occupied the Mifflin House for probably about 4 decades, early 1800s, Underground Railroad stop, Civil War site, and now a Revolutionary War site. Pete Miele.
Thank you. When Jim says that the two foremost Jonathan Mifflin scholars are in the same room, there is a wide gulf in that. And I'm still learning a lot, but I did let June know my key finding for this evening. She didn't know that, so I'm hoping that you'll all find this interesting. This started because I was strong-armed by Jim.
That happens.
And Randy Parker knows that happens. I, maybe about a year ago, had emailed Jim and Jamie and Donnie and asked if I could be a speaker at the Writers Roundtable, and we set it up, we set the date up, and I just thought that I would talk about the Mifflin Farm, about the work that we're doing to transform it into the Susquehanna Discovery Center. And then somewhere, I don't know, 6 months ago or so, Jim's like, "You're going to talk about the American Revolution, right? You're going to talk about the connections between the American Revolution and Mifflin." And I said, "Yeah, okay." And so then sometime in April, he really strong-armed me, and he said, "Well, I need your title and your description." And back in April, I sat one morning down at Copper Crust, and I wrote something out that I really liked. This title I thought was really cool, and the topic I thought was really cool, and I sent it off to Jim, and I was like, "Yeah, I can do this." And then about 2 weeks ago, I was like, "Oh, how do I do this?" So really, that's sort of my setup to say that this is a type of presentation. The type of presentation I'm going to give tonight is sort of out of my comfort zone, because usually I like to go into presentations and really know what I'm talking about, be really confident in what I'm saying. And almost purposefully, I kind of left it a little open because of the audience, of the format of these gatherings, that I am looking for feedback. I'm testing some ideas. I think that eventually this could turn into something for the journal, but it's certainly not there yet. So give me a little grace, and then give me your thoughts as well. I didn't have time to do in-depth archival research. I'm working full-time, leading this massive project out in Wrightsville. And I'm also, when I have time, finishing up my dissertation. So I really focused on what could I gather from online sources. And when I say that, I mean online archives. And I've been really lucky, I guess we're all really lucky, that the archives of the Continental Congress have been digitized and published and are available on Internet Archive and published in a book. And so I was able to use that, and then found a really useful source, an article in Pennsylvania History and Magazine of History and Biography on Thomas Mifflin, who is Jonathan's second cousin, and of course later becomes the governor of Pennsylvania. And the stories of Jonathan and Thomas really get intertwined when we get into the Revolutionary War. And so I really think an understanding of Thomas Mifflin is necessary for a true understanding of Jonathan, at least in the Revolutionary War. And finally, the last thing I'll say in terms of my setup is I really started thinking about Quakers. That's probably not something you're going to hear much outside this room. But I really wanted to think about how the Quakers of the river region created their society in the mid 18th century when they first settled there, the Wright family. And then how did they understand the revolution? And so with that, the first thing that I started thinking about is, what do we mean when we say American Revolution? And in 2008, I took a course during my undergrad, The Era of the American Revolution. And I was so excited because I was on a Revolutionary War kick and thinking about the conflict. And I lived in northern New Jersey, where a lot of the Revolutionary War fighting takes place in New Jersey, at least in the Northeast. And I took this course, and there was not one class session about the war. That the American Revolution was about just that this is actually a change in society. And so I really started thinking about that class and that realization as I prepared for this presentation. And I cracked open actually a book from that class, Gordon Wood's Radicalism of the American Revolution, which Gordon Wood published and won the Pulitzer Prize, I think in 1993, which, believe it or not, is 33 years ago. And the case that Wood makes in that book is that this was a total overthrow of society at the time. That the American Revolution, and I'll read some of what he says. American society was transformed. By every measure, there was a sudden bursting forth, an explosion, not only of geographical movement, but of entrepreneurial energy, of religious passion, of pecuniary desires. Perhaps no country in the Western world has ever gone such a massive changes in such a short period of time. And one of the things that he highlights in this book about what that massive change was a reordering of society, that moving from a monarchical society of primarily, of course, Great Britain, to a more democratic society, and almost a leveling of society. So I sort of started with that thought in my head, and then moved towards thinking about Quakers and Quakers within that sort of context of this overthrow of the monarchy. And I turned to the middle book there, Albion's Seed, 4 British Folkways in America. And has anybody read that book? It's back from the late 80s. So I'm going back to books that were published, 30, 35 years ago. But the thesis of David Hackett Fisher is that there are 4 types of British folkways that come over from Great Britain and are basically transplanted to America. And that we have these kind of 4 regions in America that form in the colonial period. So you have this Puritan movement settle in New England. You have this Quaker movement settle here in sort of the Philadelphia region. You have sort of a more genteel settlement in kind of upper class of Great Britain settling in the Virginia area, leadership, gentry, and then you have the Scots-Irish that are settling in the backcountry. And that these folk, the cultures that they brought from different areas in England are transplanted here. And I mean, we can sort of see that in when you look at sort of this rough and tumble Scots-Irish. I had coffee with Jim yesterday morning, and I proposed this thought. I think it's very basic, but the difference between sort of York and Lancaster County is that, you know, Lancaster County is settled by Quakers, and I know that there are Quakers here in York too, but you see a lot more Scots-Irish cross the river, and that there's this different culture, that sort of rough and tumble culture that forms here and then spreads down towards the Shenandoah Valley. But I used this book to really start thinking about Quakers and the society that they brought with them from Great Britain, and you know, they sort of brought here this idea, of course, of religious freedom, of the leveling of society in terms of gender, equality amongst the genders, and that they valued these rights of life, liberty, and estates. And this is all in the colonial period. So they're sort of preceding some of the rights that we see inherent in the Declaration of Independence. And Fisher, just to read a quick quote from him, says that in respect to liberty of conscience, trial by jury, the rights of property, the rule of representation, and race slavery, Quakers genuinely believe that every liberty demanded for oneself should be extended to others. This idea of reciprocal liberty continues to exist in the United States. So I think that the case that I'm trying to build here is that, you know, although we see Quakers as conservative, and I think that there are elements certainly of Quakerism that are conservative, they were also revolutionary for the period. Some of the things that they were saying sort of preceded what we see in terms of the Declaration of Independence. And then finally, Randy Harris, who's a researcher from Lancaster, I think he's watching on Zoom this evening. We were on the phone last week as I was working on this project, and he told me about this book, Prisoners of Congress, Quakers in Exile, Philadelphia's Quakers in Exile. I had never heard of this story, but there is a group of Quakers who are banished from Philadelphia 1777 to 1778, which what's happening in Philadelphia during that time, because the Continental Congress is here. Yeah, so there's these Quakers that are not necessarily, you know, they're certainly not fighting for their country. Many of them are not picking up guns because of their pacifism. So it's not particularly clear where their loyalties lie. And it's just, and so these Quakers are banished from Philadelphia and sent to Winchester, Virginia, without a trial. And the introduction to this book by Norman Donahue, it's a story that really has never been told. And they pass right through, these exiled Quakers pass right through York. So we gotta nail that story down. So that's sort of the kind of the things that are sort of in the back of my head as I have approached this and talking and thinking about the Mifflins and the Wrights, because of course, as I mentioned, you know, the Wrights are the first really Quaker family of the river region and become leaders, and so are bringing some of this culture with them as they settle in Wrightsville and Columbia. So let's, of course, take a look at sort of what we're talking about. What's the river region? and what is the Mifflin House. And by now, probably many of you in this room know what the Mifflin House is, what the Mifflin Farm is. But here is a map of York County. I think it's 1818. And I put a star right there where the Mifflin Farm is in the extreme eastern end of York County, Pelham Township. So the property today borders Pelham Township and Wrightsville Borough. And the Mifflins are going to settle there in 1800. But the property is originally owned by John Wright Sr., who founds Wrightsville and founds Columbia, settles in the area, becomes a justice of the peace and a representative to the General Assembly. And he passes the land on to his son James, who, upon his death, the property goes to James's daughter, Susanna. And Susanna Mifflin, the younger, because there are two Susanna Mifflins, marries Jonathan Mifflin in about 1800. So let's just go back quickly. I want to just sort of show this is an aerial photo from 1937. So of course it's
Built up a little since then.
a little bit, but certainly not built up as much as it is now. And that's the point that I'm trying to get across. This is the earliest aerial photo that we have of the property. And really what I want to illustrate here is how far removed the Mifflin Farm was from Wrightsville, even as it was expanding, even as it was even smaller in the early 1800s. Certainly now you have Cool Springs Road through here, you've got Route 30 going this way. So this was a pretty large farmstead, prosperous in the 1800s, and looks a lot different today. But let's go to look at this family tree. And really the most important thing that I think I've done sort of historically in my work with the Mifflins and Wrights and the Mifflin Farm has been trying to untangle this family tree. Because as you can see, there are a lot of people named John. There are a couple of Susannas in here. There's more Johns. So, one of the first things that I had to do, and some of you have heard this story. I got so frustrated one day. I went into our conference room at our office and pulled the marker board off the wall and put it down on the conference table and drew this out. I have an original photo somewhere, and I was using that in presentations, but I decided to make it a little bit more professional. So I'm going to start by talking about the Wrights here. And what makes things even more complicated is there are two branches of Wrights that are in this region. And as far as I can tell, there is no intersection until we get down here to the 19th century. So, there's a William Wright here and there's a William Wright here, same generation. And I think very often I've actually seen these two William Wrights. Both are prolific conductors on the Underground Railroad, and they get confused. That there's an Adams County William Wright, and then there's a Columbia William Wright, and that William Wright is Susanna's brother. But let's start at the top here. Let's start with the patriarch, John Wright Sr., who's born in England and emigrates to Chester, Pennsylvania in 1714, and then moves on to Columbia and settles Columbia in the 1720s. And he becomes, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, a justice of the peace. He serves in the General Assembly of Pennsylvania for, I think it's almost 20 consecutive terms. So not only is he a leader in the community, but he's becoming a leader in Pennsylvania. And this is a man who establishes the ferry. This is what the restaurant's named after. And he has 5 children, 3 of whom are sort of important for our story. And his son, James, and his other son, John. So James settles in Columbia, John settles in York, on the York side. And at one point, all 3 of them, father and the 2 sons, are serving in the Pennsylvania General Assembly. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that, again, not just leaders in the local area, but leaders within the state, within the what becomes the state, the colony. And I also discovered, and I just, this is just interesting because we're talking about revolution and the connections to the revolution, that the Pennsylvania General Assembly purchases what becomes the Liberty Bell in 1751 upon the 50th anniversary of William Penn's Charter of Privileges. And both James Wright and John Wright are members of the Pennsylvania General Assembly that vote to purchase what then becomes the Liberty Bell. So I thought that that was just sort of a cool kind of human interest connection. James Wright is the man who builds what's now Wright's Ferry Mansion, most associated now with Susanna. That's the oldest structure in Columbia. And he serves in the General Assembly until 1771. And as you can see here, both James and John died before the American Revolution, but had served in Pennsylvania's General Assembly. I think James serves almost up to his death. And so James has 4 children, and one of whom is Susanna. And actually, I did discover when she was born in I think it's 1754. And I updated that, but I didn't drop the new one into the PowerPoint. And she has 2 brothers and a sister. So this was a slide to talk a little bit about Columbia, about the ferry. You can see Columbia's right about there. If you didn't already know, I know most of you are York County, so you don't ever go to Lancaster. Well, let's get into the meat of the matter and talk a little bit now about Jonathan Mifflin, because of course he is the most direct connection between the Mifflin farm, the Mifflin house, and the Underground Railroad. See, I'm just fall right into that Underground Railroad. That's
Just skip right over.
That's what I'm just talking. But the American Revolution, and in the 1890s, a family member privately publishes basically a book, family history called the Memoranda of the Mifflin Family, and it gives the entire family tree up to that point of the Mifflins in America, and gives brief biographical descriptions of the famous people. So this is available on Internet Archive. It's been a great resource. It's really helped me untangle that family tree. And there's a great biographical description of Jonathan Mifflin. So basically, up until I really started getting into this project, everything I knew about Jonathan Mifflin's service in the Revolutionary War came from that book. And without going into too much detail, it basically said that he was a deputy quartermaster general. He served as a brigade major, and he had fought in the Battle of Long Island. And then during the retreat from Long Island, there's this great story about him. He's in a rowboat and he's holding the horse's reins behind him, and the horse is swimming as they're retreating from Long Island back to New York. When you really kind of think about that story and think about the distance that they were probably traveling, I don't know if that story is true. June? I don't know.
Sounds a lot more than that.
Oh, okay. and that upon landing, George Washington wished to send some important dispatches to one of his generals, and Jonathan Mifflin was the only one that had a serviceable horse. So now we're saying that this horse swam from Long Island to Manhattan, from Brooklyn to Manhattan, and then was ready to go and help send a message. So I think that might be a little bit of a tall tale. The other thing about this that comes from this history is that during the Battle of Brandywine, that Mifflin comes across the Marquis de Lafayette, who has had his horse shot out from under him and is wounded. And Jonathan Mifflin gives the Marquis his horse so he can escape. And that had Mifflin not given Lafayette his horse, Lafayette would have been captured. Again, here's this guy that shows up in these really key moments. And I didn't find anything as I prepared for this presentation to corroborate them. So I'll just get that out of the way first. Here's a picture of the home of the ancestral Mifflin home in Philadelphia, Fountain Green, where Jonathan is born. And it's in what's today Fairmount Park, and unfortunately was demolished to make way for some of the construction of Fairmount Park. But there is a road, Fountain Green Drive, that still exists in the park today and is nearby where the house was. His father, Jonathan Mifflin's father, John, if we want to keep things confusing, was himself a Philadelphia merchant and shows up on a list of merchants that signed in October of 1765, signed this opposition to the non-importation resolution, so the Stamp Act. And basically, I'll just read one of the top line here, that the people that are signing this document abhor the many difficulties they now labor under as a trading people, which are owing to the restrictions, prohibitions, and ill-advised regulations made in several acts of Parliament of Great Britain lately passed to regulate the colonies. So this is really the first shot across the bow of first of the Parliament in Great Britain placing these acts on the colonies to make up money for the French and Indian War. But then the colonies are starting to fight back. And so John Mifflin, the father, is a signatory to this document. So you can sort of gather that they are already at this point thinking about, how to kind of go back against the British Empire, the British Parliament. Now, this is probably primarily an economic decision. I mean, these are merchants who are losing money based on these laws that are being passed. So it's not a totally revolutionary act, but it certainly speaks to what becomes one of the major issues moving forward. So there's the copy of the memorandum of the Mifflin family, written by John Houston Mifflin in 1890. And then, as I was sort of going through Fold 3 and sort of all of those usual databases, I came across this document that became really instructive. It's an application to the Sons of the American Revolution, filled out by a man named Robert Mifflin Pacipi in 1928. And I didn't put the whole document in here, but one of the things that he has to do to apply for membership is to put in his ancestors' service. What did Jonathan Mifflin do? So that sort of uncovered some of the roles that he had in the American Revolution. And so, as I said earlier, so that sort of set me on this path of, okay, maybe there's a little bit more than what's written in the memoranda. Maybe there is a little bit more to this story than we knew. And that's when I came across this article that was written in Pennsylvania Magazine of History and Biography. It was written in 1998. It's called Republican Ideology and Wartime Reality, Thomas Mifflin's Struggle as the First Quartermaster General of the Continental Army. And that's when I started to realize that to really understand the story of Jonathan and his service, you've got to start with his second cousin, Thomas. Because Thomas really seems like the man that gives Jonathan the chances that he has, provides Jonathan with the support and the roles within the Continental Army that Jonathan eventually holds. And so Thomas was himself a Philadelphia merchant, served as a representative to the provincial assembly, Philadelphia's representative to the Pennsylvania Provincial Assembly. He's very revolutionary in his own right and travels to Massachusetts during the siege of Boston. And George Washington sort of takes Mifflin under his wing and eventually appoints Mifflin the Quartermaster General of the Continental Army on August 14th, 1775. So pretty early in the war. But surprisingly for a Quaker, Mifflin really wants field command. He does not want to be quartermaster, which is basically dealing with the logistics of supplying the army, which is not so much a sexy job. So he does briefly hold field command during the New York campaign, and then returns to quartermaster duties in October of 1776, and that's where he's going to sit until he loses that position in 1778. And he chooses his cousin Jonathan as his deputy quartermaster general. And so this is more of a, from what I can tell, sort of a clerkship role. And Jonathan is responsible for really procuring supplies, helping to distribute supplies. During the Long Island campaign, there's a part of orders that are issued by Nathaniel Greene of the Continental Army say that Captain Spurs is to draw out a party of carpenters to make bell tents, and they are to apply to Colonel Mifflin for tools, boards, and nails to make them up, so that this fatigue group is supposed to go to Colonel Mifflin, which is Jonathan, and secure supplies for making these tents. And as the war drags on, he shows up in the Pennsylvania archives in two separate instances. There are two cases where Jonathan Mifflin has dealings with the General Assembly, and one of them is during the Brandywine campaign, in which he does not have enough wagons to supply the militia. And he writes to the General Assembly that the militia should have some indulgences more than are allowed to men who are become accustomed to the fatigues of the campaign. So he wants to sort of support the militia, who are maybe not as seasoned as the men who have been on campaign as often. He keeps trying to get wagons to help support the militia. Probably the most important source that came out in this source, or the most important story that came out in this source, happens the following year, in February of 1778. Mifflin and two other men are sent to become purchasing agents for the Continental Army. And so they are stationed in different parts of the North, in Pennsylvania and northern New Jersey, to buy supplies on behalf of the Continental Army, and then forward those supplies to the Army itself. And Jonathan sets to work at an office in Reading. He and two others are responsible for Sussex County, New Jersey, Northampton County, Pennsylvania, Berks County, Bucks County, and Philadelphia. And he sets up his office, and within just a few weeks, he gets accused of purchasing items at too high a price. That there had been a price set by the Board of War, what you could go to, and he's paying more than that. And the question sort of becomes, is he trying to beat out other people? Or is he buying at this inflated price because he's getting a commission?
Right.
And so there's sort of this back and forth, and the Board of War says, it appears that the said superintendents are making contracts for executing the business entrusted with the said commissioners, contrary to the intentions of Congress expressed in their said resolutions. And whereas it also appears by the aforesaid letter that the above named superintendents, and Mifflin is one of them, without any authority and in direct violation of the laws of Pennsylvania, contrary to the instructions given by the Board of War, are presumed to fix and ascertain the prices of several articles wanted in the Army much higher than fixed by law in the state, directing the quartermasters to govern themselves by such illegal rates. Therefore resolved that the Board of War be directed immediately to recall and suspend the said R.L. Hooper, Nathaniel Falconer, and Jonathan Mifflin, who are required to lay before Congress their proceedings and accounts. So he's getting hauled before Congress. And he, instead of facing this congressional inquiry, resigns. And so the author of the Pennsylvania Magazine of History and Biography article, he offers two potential ideas here. That one, that did Mifflin purposefully do this, or again, was he trying to beat out other people? But before Congress could investigate this conduct, he resigned his commission, which suggests he may not have been completely innocent. To be fair, Thomas Mifflin is no saint in any of this either. One of the reasons that Thomas Mifflin is appointed the Quartermaster General is because he had been a merchant in Philadelphia, and a successful one at that. But there's some evidence that suggests that he was profiting off of purchasing items, supplies for the Army. There was one story that I saw that he and Jonathan and some others owned a ship together, and there was flour coming in on this ship, and they bought the flour for the Continental Army. So they were basically buying the flour from themselves to then give to the Continental Army. And yes, they were supplying the Army, but they were also making money at the same time. So I think that there's sort of this gray area that emerges at this time, with sort of this kind of disinterestedness that is supposed to be a good civic virtue, to put the country above yourself, but also they need to do their jobs and supply the country. So you have these two kind of competing interests going on here, and Jonathan and Thomas are caught up in it, and both leave the Army before the end of hostilities. From what I can tell, Jonathan does join the first troop of Philadelphia Cavalry, which is an old organization. In fact, they're out here, right? They're fighting here during the Civil War. Braden, my intern, is shaking his head. Yes. So it's a long-standing sort of ceremonial cavalry troop. And he joins that, so I think he's trying to save some sort of face, and serves, is elected to that honorary role, the honorary role in 1790. And I think that's how he, from what I can tell, that's how he finishes off his Revolutionary War service. Sort of in disgrace, but trying to save face in some way. I do want to talk a little bit about sort of going back to this idea of the revolution as a social and cultural movement, and talk a little bit about the two Susannas, because the older Susanna, the more famous of the two, herself is considered almost an anomaly for her time, in that she was carrying on conversations, writing letters to Benjamin Franklin, Benjamin Rush, James Logan, Secretary of Pennsylvania, and was not necessarily playing the role that many women of the period were playing. She had a strong legal mind, and was sought after for legal advice in Columbia, and in some ways became the leader of Columbia in practice after her father passes away, and purchases land on her own, engages in some scientific pursuits, brings silkworms to America, or is responsible for raising the profile of silk and silkworms in America. And she helped care for her younger brother, James, after their mother dies. So James is only 8 years old when his mother dies. And Susanna sort of takes over the role of mother, and of kind of the first lady of the household. And likely that extends down to his children. She never married, she never has any children of her own, but was known to be somebody who took younger people in and helped to educate them. So I think that there's a strong possibility that these 4 children of James were heavily influenced by their aunt. And, I mentioned that, maybe I mentioned this, that this Susanna was a poet, and not a lot of her poetry survives, but one piece does. And Jack Brubaker, who the scribbler for LNP, wrote an article in Pennsylvania Heritage Magazine all about Susanna Wright, and he published some of the excerpts from her poetry. And one of these excerpts is, "No right has man his equal to control, since all agree there is no sex in the soul. Weak women, this in agreement grown strong, shakes off the yoke her parents wore too long." So she is advocating for more equality among the genders, and this is, a Quaker idea that there is no sex in the soul, no gender in the soul. So I think that I take that as a revolutionary idea in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. And so, what can we say about how this Susanna maybe was influenced by her aunt? I think one way that we can see this is that she herself was a landowner. She inherits what becomes the Mifflin farm from her father, and shows up as a landlady on the 1798 glass tax. She owns the land and has a tenant living there by the name of John Newcomer. And she also eventually serves as a leader in the Quaker meeting, She serves as a what's called an overseer, somebody who ensured the pastoral physical care of members. And so I think by thinking about her, this younger Susanna, as that leader, we can see the influence of potentially her revolutionary aunt. And there's the Wrights Ferry mansion, which is most closely associated with Susanna, but was actually built by her brother James, and she only lived there for a short period. Although today they claim her story and tell her story, and it's a story that needs to be told. Braden and I went this morning, and actually this picture is the one I took this morning. So I was really happy to be able to not have to steal one online. The last person that I just want to briefly talk about, because he maybe is the most important figure of the American Revolution from Columbia, and that's Thomas Boone, who serves as a captain and commands a body of troops in General Washington's headquarters, and also as a member of his staff, and joins the Continental Army in 1776 and serves until 1783. So serves the entire war, fights at Stony Point on the Hudson River, and then returns, comes back to Columbia and serves in the General Assembly, but is probably best known for operating a lumber yard in Columbia, which, and he is the man who eventually buys the time of a young boy from Harrisburg named Stephen Smith. And eventually Stephen Smith grows up and purchases the remainder of his time from Boone, and eventually purchases the lumber yard and becomes the richest black man, one of the richest black men in America, and a figure in the Underground Railroad in the region. And so
Somebody's at the door, can I know?
Boone, again, he's part of that generation that sort of comes after John Wright, but shows how there's sort of this revolutionary ethos that continues in the river region as we come out of the American Revolution and continue into the Federalist era, the making of a new nation. That's where we're gonna pick up the Mifflin story. All the stories I talked about regarding Jonathan Mifflin, he might not even know where Columbia or Wrightsville is when he's fighting the revolution. He probably doesn't know. He doesn't move there until 1800. And it's almost like with Mifflin, you can look at these two halves of his life. The first half of his life almost exactly is him as a Philadelphia merchant, as a Revolutionary War soldier. He marries twice, has a few children, only one of which lives to maturity. And that all happens before 1800. And then there's this whole second half of his life from 1800 to 1840, where he's living in Wrightsville. He marries Susanna Mifflin. They have a son together, Samuel, and he becomes an early conductor on the Underground Railroad. So, thinking about the revolution not just as the war or what happens between 1776 and 1783, but how do people like Boone and Mifflin continue on that legacy of the revolution in this new nation? So I've thrown a lot of ideas at you, many of them half-formed, and I've been thinking sort of where do I go from here, if anywhere. I think that one way to go is to look at, again, the building of this new nation through internal improvements. The roadways, the canals, and the railroads that eventually are going to crisscross this nation, which the Mifflins are involved in. Jonathan Mifflin is an early investor in the bridge, the 1814 bridge that crosses the Susquehanna. He's an early investor in the turnpike between Wrightsville and York. His son Samuel becomes a civil engineer on the Pennsylvania Railroad, helps to lay out the railroad across Pennsylvania. And I think that in many ways that's a natural extension of where this story begins. I think that another avenue of study is better understanding Jonathan's departure from the army. What did happen? Can we uncover what happened surrounding his leaving in 1778? But then also, as I was sort of explaining this story to Jamie the other day, she asked, how do we reconcile his army service with his later life? You know, he maybe was engaging in some of these underhanded business dealings when he was a deputy quartermaster, but then he goes on to being a prolific Underground Railroad conductor. So can we reconcile those two things? My response to Jamie was maybe he was making penance for the rest of his life. I don't think that that's true. And then I think what wipe the slate clean, right? And then finally, you know, I think that there's a lot more work to be done on Quakers and slavery, especially in Pennsylvania, but in the river region. How are people in the river region? How are Quakers making sense of slavery in the years after the Revolution? We know that they become conductors on the Underground Railroad, but also, you know, there are the Mifflins, and I know that this causes some issues sometimes when I bring it up, but I'll just stick to the facts. In 1824, Jonathan Mifflin puts an ad in the paper in the Pennsylvania Republican for a runaway indentured servant, black boy of 15 named Stephen Jones. So how do we reconcile that fact with thinking about what indentured servitude means in Pennsylvania at the time? What did Quakers think about chattel slavery versus indentured servitude, the different degrees? So that's where I would sort of take this from here, if I decide to buckle down and try to write something for the journal. So thank you for listening to my sort of half-formed pseudo rambles. I'm sure that people have thoughts, questions, comments. Maybe I'll start with Doug Hoke.
And I apologize for being late. There was a city function on.
It's okay.
Before Pete takes questions, we give him a round of applause, please.
Yes, yeah, I'll repeat the question. Yes.
I think it would be interesting to see in the legislative histories what kind of legislation the Wrights and Mifflins supported or did not support in their tenure in the General Assembly.
That's great. So it was seeing in the legislative history what the Mifflins and the Wrights supported during their time in the assembly. That's fantastic, Academy. Thank you. That's it. Yeah.
Maybe you could get a bit more kind of the creation of the Mifflin House through this union of marriage. I mean, what, you know, how did that get going?
Yeah, so the question is about the creation of the Mifflin House through this union of marriage. So Jonathan moves to Lancaster County in the late 1790s. The business, his mercantile business, starts to fail, I think, through the disruption of trade with Great Britain, the quasi-war with France. And so he is sort of looking for a restart and moves to Lancaster. And through the Salisbury Monthly Meeting in Salisbury on the eastern edge of Lancaster County, that's the for lack of a better word, the kind of congregation of Quakers that he joins. That's how he meets Suzanne. She's a member as well. And they declare their intentions in November of 1800. And so that's why I say the house was built probably at earliest 1801, because they don't get married until November of 1800. And I'm pretty sure they weren't living in sin. And so that's how the house comes about. We don't know where the money came from for them to build it. I think even though his business was failing, it doesn't seem like he was sort of hard up for money ever. I haven't found any evidence of that. I think his estate, when he passed away, is pretty well off. So they settle into the life of what they think is basically going to be, country farmers, country landowners, and then that's when they get involved in the Underground Railroad, probably before 1810. Yes.
Did you come across information about the relationship between the Quakers, this is the wilderness at that time, of the Quakers of the wilderness with the Quakers of Philadelphia and what their relationships were?
Yeah, that's another great question. The Quakers of the Wilderness versus the Quakers of Philadelphia. What's the relationship? The one thing that I can speak to in terms of that, I didn't read this quote earlier, but let me go back to it. Hang on. Now let me see if I can find it. Oh, this comes from Ellis and Evans, which is the kind of the standard history of Lancaster County written in the 1800s, and they say about the pioneer Quakers, it is well to mention that these pioneer Quakers who settled on the Susquehanna were a law unto themselves, and for many years refused to have anything to do with the yearly or quarterly meetings of Friends elsewhere. So that's at least sort of early. I think that by the time we get to the Revolutionary War, it seems like they're back in the fold. They're serving in the General Assembly, although they probably were serving in the General Assembly around during this period too. But we certainly know that somehow they're back into the Salisbury monthly meeting because that's how Jonathan and Susanna meet, and they show up on records of those. But for a while there, it might have been a little lawless.
Yeah. Thank you.
Jamie, and then Nicole.
Pete, could you tell us a little, you're launching, correct me if I'm wrong, the largest capital campaign in York County history,
Yeah,
right?
no, because Wellspan's bigger, but.
Okay. Would you tell us a little about your time frame of when the people in this room can visit the site to continue learning more about the.
All on Randy Parker now. So, I didn't really talk about that, but, the Susquehanna National Heritage Area owns the Mifflin Farm. And our vision is to transform the farm into a visitor destination for the 2-county National Heritage Area.
Not a casino.
Not a casino, maybe.
Ooh.
But anyway,
Could speed things up.
yeah. So it's interesting because with the project, we're trying to do multiple things on this piece of property. One of which is to have a site where people can learn about what makes York and Lancaster County unique, and then go out into the counties and visit these small communities, these small towns, and see for themselves. We also will have York County's first art museum, focused on art of the Susquehanna River and the birth of American landscape art. But we also have this site that, as you can see, has its own stories, has its own story to tell. So we're working to kind of balance that we want visitors to come and leave and go out, but we also want visitors to come and stay and learn about American history as it is reflected in the site itself. So that's sort of the overall vision of the project. And the estimate right now is that the project will cost about $50 million.
It's gonna be worth it.
And it's gonna be worth it. And so we are working right now, actively engaged in re-envisioning the house, the Mifflin House, as an Underground Railroad learning center, a place where you can come and learn about the Mifflins and the freedom seekers that sought refuge there. And also with that, renovation, that rehabilitation will be a initial walking trail system of about 2 miles on this 87-acre farm. And then by 2030, so that'll be complete by 2028, 2029. And then by 2033, we'll have the Discovery Center, the Art Museum, and the full trail system open and available. No, yes.
But one point there, because we joke around about the price tag on this, but one thing to keep in mind is that this will fully serve all of York and Lancaster counties, and it will rely upon the philanthropy of both of those counties. The footprint is in York County, but the charge of the organization is to completely serve the two-county region as one region. We're an oddball out there, we see the two counties equally.
We're trying to break down that major barrier that.
You know, we sit here in the wilderness today.
Yeah. At the genteel Lancaster County. Nicole, do you have somebody online?
Yes, just a quick question, asking if the Mifflin family has any family papers or letters that you know of.
Yes, so the question is, does the Mifflin family have any papers or letters? I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that the York County History Center has a Mifflin family file. There are also mentions in some of the Quaker papers that are held by, I think it's Swarthmore or, yes, okay. And so, but I know that we've had great success in with our friends at York County History Center, and I'm covering some of that material.
And
Yes,
in, and in the meantime, you are open, right? Because I know my daughter and I
Yes.
guess it's been like 2 years ago. We went out and Barb Brundage did a nice presentation.
So we will be opening for our second season, we'll be opening on Saturday. So when we purchased the property, one of the first projects that we undertook was the installation of a new walkway, new driveway, and a parking area. So the site is accessible, and we have started slow, opening on Saturdays, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., free of charge. You get to come into the house, hear some of the stories about the Mifflins and the Underground Railroad, walk some of the ground, see inside the barn. And it's a way of starting to share these stories that it's been private property for 225 years up to this point. So we wanted to be able to share these stories and share the importance with you all. So that is starting 2 days from now. And then also, Randy would hit me if I didn't say this, but on June 12th, we're going to have our major annual fundraiser, the Summer Soiree, which will be out on the farm. So if you want to come and hang out on the farm and support Susquehanna National Heritage Area, see all of this for yourself, there are still tickets available for Summer Soiree. Visit our website, susqnha.org. And then on June 19th, Juneteenth, we are going to have an outdoor screening of the movie Glory on the farm. We're going to have an inflatable screen and show Glory and have a talk about men from Columbia and the South Central Pennsylvania region that joined the 54th Massachusetts. So it's not just we're showing the movie Glory, we're showing the movie Glory with a specific reason that there are men that come from here that go and fight with the 54th. And then I think that there are still a few tickets available on Saturday, June 20th. We are going to do the first hike and paddle on the river. So we're actually going to hike from the Mifflin house down to the river. And then we're going to board kayaks and kayak across the Columbia. So following in the steps of freedom seekers. And we're going to be joined by some of the performers from Bethel AME's Living the Experience. So there will be people who will meet us along the way and share their stories. And then finally, this is all in June. This is like all in the next.
This is what we call no sleep June.
We're not even on July 1st yet. We have our annual Riverfest weekend. So we've been doing this for years now, commemorating the weekend of the burning of the bridge. And what's special for this year, America 250, is we are going to light all of the bridge piers in commemoration of the burning of the bridge. That's been supported by the Simon von Hess Foundation. And if that wasn't enough, we have worked with PennDOT to close the Veterans Memorial Bridge for 2 hours to cars. So you'll be able to walk across the Veterans Memorial Bridge and see the lit piers from the bridge. And as I've also said, we're doing that as a public service because we want people to get used to that bridge being closed. So that brings us up to that. That's all between now and June 28th. So yeah.
Let's give Pete another round of applause, please. That was the third time in 8 days I had the opportunity to hear Pete, and each time he has a different story. I learned something new. He's an excellent speaker. I tell him that I would love to sit in on one of his college classes, except they're 8 o'clock in the morning. And even though I start work at 8, I don't get up early if I don't have to. So thank you so much for joining us for another Writers Roundtable in June. We'll be meeting again in September. Adrielle Rush will be here. She's from the JCC. She'll talk about York's role in liberating the concentration camps in World War II. So mark your calendars, first Thursday in September. So don't go anywhere because Nicole's on the clock till 8:30. And we're gonna maximize our time for 19 minutes, but then we're gonna have a hard stop at 8:30 because she does have to get home in the evenings. This room is filled with institutional knowledge and experience that people like Pete and I want to learn from. We have an intern here from the Susquehanna Heritage Center that wants to learn. And so we're curious if you could just share out what you're working on. But to do that, instead of having you come up here and stand, I think that there's something really special about us situating our chairs where we can see each other eye to eye and be more of a true cohort. So would you mind for a second just taking your chairs or maybe moving to the perimeters and situating yourself so we can see one another?
True roundtable.